The dust devil that tore through Ogden, Utah. That scorching July afternoon in 1883 carried more than just sand and tumbleweed. It carried the desperate hopes of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Tabitha Owens gripped the side of the stagecoach as it rattled down the main street, her knuckles white beneath her worn gloves, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing trying to escape. She had sold everything she owned back in St. Louis, packed her life into a single trunk, and bought a one-way ticket west to marry a man she had never met, a rancher named Harold Winters, who had promised her security and a fresh start through carefully worded letters that now felt like lies wrapped in fine penmanship. The stage lurched to a stop outside the general store, and Tabitha descended on shaking legs, her simple gray dress already clinging to her skin in the oppressive heat. The driver hefted her trunk down with a grunt, and she stood there on the wooden boardwalk, scanning the handful of faces that had gathered to watch the stage arrive. None of them stepped forward. None of them looked like they were waiting for a bride. "Excuse me," she said to a woman carrying a basket of eggs, her voice cracking from the dry air and something deeper. "Do you know where I might find Harold Winters?" The woman's expression shifted from curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like pity. "Harold Winters. Oh, honey, you must not have heard. He died 3 weeks back. Horse threw him, broke his neck. We buried him out at the cemetery on the hill." The world tilted. Tabitha felt her knees buckle, and she grabbed the post beside her to keep from falling. Dead. The man she had traveled 800 miles to marry was dead, and nobody had thought to send her a telegram. She had 47 cents in her reticule, a trunk full of clothes that were too fine for manual labor and too worn for society, and absolutely nowhere to go. "Are you all right, miss?" The woman touched her arm, genuine concern in her weathered face. "Did you come all this way to see him?" "I was supposed to marry him," Tabitha whispered, the admission tasting like ash. "I sold everything. I have nothing to go back to." The woman made a sympathetic sound and called over her shoulder. "Martha, Martha, come here. This girl needs help." The next few hours passed in a blur. The women of Ogden, Utah were nothing if not practical, and they assembled in the back room of the general store like a council of war, discussing what could be done with this stranded mail-order bride who had arrived 3 weeks too late. Tabitha sat numbly through it all, drinking the bitter coffee someone pressed into her hands, trying to understand how her life had come to this moment. She could work at the boarding house, one woman suggested. Mrs. Henderson just hired a new girl. What about the schoolhouse? Teacher position is filled through next year. Can she cook? The hotel might need kitchen help. They all looked at Tabitha expectantly. She swallowed hard. "I can read and write and do figures. I can sew reasonably well. I can cook simple things, but I am not trained as a professional cook. I was raised to be a wife, not a worker." The admission felt like failure. "Can you sing?" asked a younger woman with kind eyes. "The saloon is always looking for entertainment, and it is a respectable establishment. Mr. Thompson does not allow anything improper." "No," Tabitha said quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I cannot sing. I cannot dance either. I have no talent for music at all. My mother always said I was hopeless in that regard." The women exchanged glances, and Tabitha felt her last hopes crumbling. She was going to end up on the street. She was going to starve in this dusty frontier town, and nobody back in St. Louis would even know what became of her. "Let me think on it," said Martha, who seemed to be the unofficial leader. "Meanwhile, you can stay in my spare room tonight. We will figure something out." Tabitha wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of pride, but she simply nodded. Beggars could not afford pride. That evening, after a quiet supper at Martha's modest house on the edge of town, Tabitha lay awake on a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and trying not to cry. Through the open window, she could hear music drifting from somewhere down the street, a fiddle playing a lively tune and the sound of laughter. People were dancing, celebrating life while hers fell apart. She must have finally slept, because when she woke, dawn light was streaming through the window and Martha was calling her for breakfast. Over eggs and bread, Martha explained that she had spoken to several business owners, and there might be a possibility at the mercantile. "It does not pay much," Martha warned, "but Mr. Chen needs someone to help with inventory and to serve customers. He is a good man, very fair, even if some folks in town do not appreciate him because he came from China. You would have to work 6 days a week, and the pay is barely enough for room and board, but it is honest work." "I will take it," Tabitha said immediately. "I am grateful for any opportunity." And so began her new life in Ogden. She moved into a tiny room above the laundry, working from dawn until dusk at Chen's mercantile, learning to manage inventory, to bargain with suppliers, to smile at customers even when they looked at her with curiosity or disdain for taking a job that a local girl might have wanted. Mr. Chen was indeed a kind man, patient with her mistakes, and he paid her exactly what he promised every week. The days blurred together. August melted into September, and the crushing heat gave way to something more bearable. Tabitha learned the rhythms of the town, the names of the regular customers, the gossip that flowed through the mercantile like a river. She learned which ranchers paid their debts promptly and which ones had to be reminded. She learned to measure out flour and sugar without spilling, to cut fabric in straight lines, to identify quality goods from inferior ones. She also learned that Ogden was a town that loved its gatherings. There seemed to be a dance or social every few weeks, barn raisings and harvest celebrations and simple Saturday night gatherings at the community hall where people came together to forget the hardships of frontier life. Tabitha never attended. She had no proper dress for dancing, no energy after her long work days, and most importantly, no desire to be the object of speculation and matchmaking. The women of Ogden meant well, but she could see it in their eyes, the calculations about which widower or bachelor might be suitable for the stranded mail-order bride. October arrived with crisp mornings and brilliant sunsets that painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold. On a Thursday afternoon, Tabitha was arranging a display of canned goods when the bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in who made her look up twice. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate sparingly, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat that had seen better days, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. When he caught her looking, he tipped his hat politely. "Afternoon, miss. I am looking for some supplies. Flour, coffee, beans, the usual." "Of course," Tabitha said, finding her professional voice. "How much flour do you need? 2 50-pound sacks should do it, and 5 pounds of coffee if you have it." She began gathering the items, and he browsed the store quietly, picking up a new rope, examining a set of work gloves, settling on a tin of tobacco. When everything was assembled on the counter, she tallied the cost carefully. "That will be $8.40. He counted out the money exactly, then paused. "I have not seen you here before. Are you new to town?" "I arrived in July," Tabitha said, keeping her tone neutral. "I work for Mr. Chen." "I am Dalton Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "I run a small ranch about 8 miles north of town. Do not get into Ogden as often as I should, which is why I have not had the pleasure of meeting you." She shook his hand briefly, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work. Tabitha Owens. Well, Miss Owens, it is nice to meet you. I expect I will be seeing more of you when I come in for supplies. He gathered his purchases, tipped his hat again, and left. Tabitha stood behind the counter, her hand still tingling slightly from the handshake, wondering why such a brief encounter had left her feeling oddly unsettled. Over the next few weeks, Dalton Crawford became a regular customer. He came in every 10 days or so, always polite, always with a list of supplies he needed. They exchanged pleasantries, brief snippets of conversation that never went deeper than the weather or the quality of the goods. Tabitha learned that he ran his ranch alone, having bought the land 5 years ago and built it up from nothing. He raised cattle and horses, did all the work himself except during roundup when he hired temporary hands. "You have never married?" She asked once, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He gave her a considering look. "Never found the right person, I suppose. Ranch life is not easy and most women want more than a man can provide out here. What about you, Miss Owens? How did you end up in Ogden?" She told him the truth, figuring he would hear it from someone else if she did not tell him herself. About Harold Winters, about arriving to find her intended groom already buried, about having to start over with nothing. "That is a hard thing," Dalton said quietly, "but you landed on your feet." "That takes strength." "It takes desperation," she corrected, but she appreciated the kindness in his eyes. November brought the first real cold and with it, preparations for the Thanksgiving social. The entire town was buzzing with excitement, planning food and decorations and, most importantly, the dancing. Tabitha listened to the chatter in the store, watched women buy new ribbon for their dresses, heard men discussing which fiddle player they were bringing in from Salt Lake City. "You are coming, are not you?" asked Sarah Bennett, one of the few women in town close to Tabitha's age. "Everyone comes to the Thanksgiving dance." "I do not think so," Tabitha said, rearranging a shelf that did not need rearranging. "I am not much for socials." "Oh, come on. You have been here 4 months and you have barely spoken to anyone outside of this store. You need to have some fun." "I cannot dance," Tabitha admitted, the words tasting like the confession of some deep failing. "I never learned properly. My mother tried to teach me, but I have no rhythm, no grace. I just make a fool of myself," Sarah laughed. "Half the people there cannot dance properly either. That is not the point. The point is being part of the community, letting yourself enjoy life a little." But Tabitha shook her head firmly. She had made enough of a spectacle of herself when she arrived. She was not about to stumble around a dance floor, proving to everyone just how ill-suited she was for frontier life. The day of the Thanksgiving social arrived cold and clear. Mr. Chen closed the store early, insisting that Tabitha attend the celebration. "You work too hard," he said in his accented English. "Go, be young, have fun, cannot work all the time." Reluctantly, Tabitha returned to her tiny room and changed into her one good dress, a deep blue cotton that had seen her through better days but was still presentable. She pinned her dark hair up carefully, studied her reflection in the small mirror, and sighed. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman trying to make the best of circumstances beyond her control. The community hall was already crowded when she arrived, warm with body heat and bright with lantern light. Tables lined one wall, groaning under the weight of food that the women had prepared, and at the far end, the musicians were tuning their instruments. People clustered in groups, laughing and talking, and Tabitha felt suddenly and intensely alone. She made her way to the food table, thinking she could at least make herself useful serving punch or cutting pie, when a voice beside her said, "Evening, Miss Owens." She turned to find Dalton Crawford, cleaned up and wearing what were clearly his best clothes. dark trousers, a white shirt, a vest that looked new. He had shaved and combed his hair, and the transformation was striking. "Mr. Crawford," she said, surprised, "I did not expect to see you here." "I thought you avoided town gatherings." "Usually I do," he admitted, "but Thanksgiving only comes once a year, and I figured I should make an effort. Besides, the food is always worth the trip." He paused, then added, "I am glad you came." Before she could respond, the music started up, a lively reel that had people flooding onto the dance floor. Tabitha watched them, couples spinning and stomping, hands clapping, faces bright with joy. It looked like chaos to her, all those moving bodies, those intricate steps that everyone else seemed to know instinctively. "Would you like to dance?" Dalton asked. Her heart sank. "I cannot," she said quickly. "I do not know how, I never learned properly, and I have no musical ability whatsoever. I would just step on your feet and embarrass us both." She expected him to make an excuse and move on to find a more suitable partner. Instead, he tilted his head thoughtfully. "Cannot dance, you say? Well, I am not much of a dancer myself. Too many years alone on the ranch, I guess. But I figure we could give it a try anyway." "You do not understand," Tabitha said, feeling her cheeks flush. "I am terrible at it. I have no rhythm. I cannot follow the music. It is genuinely awful." Dalton looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that caught her completely off guard. "Then we will dance in silence together." "What? If the music is the problem, then we will ignore it. We will just move the way we want to move together. No rules, no steps to follow. Just us." Tabitha stared at him. "That is ridiculous. Everyone will think we are insane." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe they will be too busy with their own dancing to notice. Come on, Miss Owens. What do you have to lose?" "Everything," she thought. Her dignity, her carefully maintained distance, the safe walls she had built around herself. But something in his steady gaze, in the gentle challenge of his words, made her nod. He led her to a quieter corner of the dance floor, away from the most enthusiastic dancers. The fiddle was sawing away, the rhythm fast and demanding, but Dalton simply placed one hand lightly on her waist and took her other hand in his. "Just follow me," he said. "Forget the music, just feel the movement." It was awkward at first. Tabitha was acutely aware of every stumble, every moment when her feet did not quite coordinate with his. But Dalton was patient, moving slowly, guiding her with gentle pressure. And gradually, incredibly, she began to relax. They were not dancing to the fiddle music at all, she realized. They were creating their own rhythm, something slower and simpler, just the two of them in their own bubble while the rest of the hall spun around them. "See," Dalton said softly, "you can dance." "This is not really dancing," Tabitha protested, but she was smiling despite herself. "Sure it is. It is our kind of dancing. That is all that matters." They stayed like that through the entire song, moving in their gentle, offbeat way while everyone else flew past in a blur. When the music finally stopped, Tabitha realized she was slightly breathless, and not from exertion. Dalton was looking at her with something warm in his eyes, something that made her heart do a strange little skip. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That was unexpectedly kind of you." "It was unexpectedly enjoyable for me," he replied. "Would you like to get some punch?" They spent the rest of the evening together, not dancing again, but talking. Really talking in a way they had never done in the brief transactions at the Mercantile. Dalton told her about his ranch, about the hard early years when he nearly lost everything, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. Tabitha told him about St. Louis, about her parents who had died within a year of each other, about the desperation that had led her to answer Harold Winter's advertisement. "You regret it?" Dalton asked. "Coming west," Tabitha considered. "I regret the circumstances. I regret that a man died." but I do not regret ending up here. There is a freedom in Ogden that I never had back east. Here I can work and earn my own way. I am not dependent on anyone's charity or obligated to marry for survival. That is worth something." "That is worth a lot," Dalton agreed. When the social finally wound down near midnight, Dalton walked her back to her room above the laundry. The night was cold and crystal clear. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Their breath plumed in the air as they walked, and their hands brushed occasionally, sending little jolts of awareness through Tabitha. At her door, Dalton paused. "I enjoyed tonight more than I have enjoyed anything in a long while. Thank you for taking a chance on dancing with someone who clearly had no idea what he was doing." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Tabitha said. "You were being kind to someone who needed it." "It was not kindness," he said seriously. "It was wanting to spend time with a woman I find interesting and admirable." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if I called on you, properly I mean, not just when I need supplies?" Tabitha felt something unfurl in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the day she arrived in Ogden to find her intended groom dead and buried. "I would like that," she said softly. "Good." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "How about Sunday afternoon? I could take you for a ride, show you some of the country around here." "I would enjoy that very much." True to his word, Dalton appeared Sunday afternoon with a gentle mare for her to ride and a picnic lunch packed in his saddlebag. They rode north out of town, into the rolling hills where his ranch lay. The autumn landscape was beautiful in its starkness, all golden grass and dark evergreens, with the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Dalton's ranch was modest but well kept. A sturdy log house, a barn, corrals holding a dozen horses, and a small herd of cattle grazing in the pastures beyond. He showed her around with obvious pride, pointing out improvements he had made, plans he had for expansion. "It is not much," he said, "but it is mine. Every fence post, every board, I put it there myself." "It is beautiful," Tabitha said honestly. "You should be proud." They picnicked on a hillside overlooking the ranch, eating bread and cheese and apples while watching the horses graze below. Dalton talked about his dreams for the future, about breeding better horses, about maybe adding sheep to diversify. Tabitha found herself sharing her own tentative hopes, about maybe someday having her own shop, about learning more about business and trade. "Mr. Chen has taught me a great deal," she said. "He is very shrewd about negotiating prices, about understanding what people need versus what they want. I never imagined I would find commerce interesting, but there is a satisfaction in doing it well." "You could do anything you set your mind to," Dalton said. "That much is obvious." "I wish I had your confidence," Tabitha replied with a small laugh. "You have your own strength. You just do not see it yet. You crossed half a continent alone. You rebuilt your life from nothing. That takes more courage than most people ever have to summon." His words warmed her more than the weak autumn sun. They rode back to town as the afternoon waned, and at her door, Dalton asked if he could see her again the following weekend. Tabitha agreed without hesitation. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Tabitha had imagined. Dalton was not a man of flowery words or grand gestures. He showed his feelings through actions. Bringing her wildflowers, he picked on his ride into town, fixing a loose board in her room without being asked, listening intently when she talked about her day. He courted her with patient consistency, riding 8 miles into Ogden every Sunday without fail, regardless of weather. Winter settled over the valley, bringing snow that transformed Ogden into something beautiful and harsh. Tabitha worked in the store, wrapping herself in extra shawls against the cold, and looked forward to Sundays with an intensity that surprised her. She and Dalton could not ride in the deep snow, so they walked instead, bundled in coats and scarves, their breath mingling in the frozen air. Sometimes they attended church together, sitting side by side in the back pew. Sometimes they simply sat in Martha's parlor, drinking hot coffee and talking for hours while the wind howled outside. "Tell me something you have never told anyone," Dalton said one Sunday in January as they sat before Martha's fire. Tabitha considered. "When I was a girl, maybe 7 or 8, I wanted desperately to be a singer. There was a woman who sang at our church, and she had this beautiful voice that made everyone stop and listen. I thought it was like magic, the way she could make people feel things just with her voice. I begged my mother for lessons. What happened? The teacher told my mother I was tone deaf and had no natural ability. She said it would be a waste of money to continue lessons. My mother was mortally embarrassed. She told me some people were meant to make music and others were meant to listen, and I should accept which one I was." Tabitha smiled sadly. "I have been accepting it ever since." "That teacher was an idiot," Dalton said flatly. "She was being honest. She was being cruel. There is a difference." He reached over and took her hand. "You know what I think? I think music is not just about technical perfection. It is about joy, about expression. If singing or dancing brings you joy, then you should do it, regardless of whether you do it well by someone else's standards. That is easy to say when you are not the one humiliating yourself in public." "Is that what you think happened at the Thanksgiving dance? That you humiliated yourself?" Tabitha paused, realizing she had not thought about it that way. The truth was, she had enjoyed that strange, quiet dance with Dalton more than any perfect waltz she might have executed. "No," she admitted. "I suppose it was not humiliating at all." "Exactly. Because it was real. Because it was us, not some performance for other people." February brought a break in the bitter cold, a false spring that had everyone in Ogden venturing outside with renewed energy. There was talk of a Valentine's social, another dance, and this time Tabitha found herself actually looking forward to it. "You will save me a dance?" she asked Dalton when he came in for supplies. "I will save you all my dances," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Then more seriously he added, "Tabitha, I need to ask you something. Can I call on you tomorrow? I want to talk to you about something important." Her heart jumped. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. I just have something I need to say, and I would rather do it proper-like, not in the middle of the mercantile." He arrived Sunday morning, earlier than usual, and asked if she would take a walk with him despite the muddy streets. They ended up at the edge of town, looking out at the mountains still capped with snow. "I am not good with words," Dalton began, his hands shoved in his pockets. "Never have been, but I am going to try because you deserve to hear this said right." He turned to face her. "When I met you last October, I thought you were pretty and seemed pleasant enough. But over these months, Tabitha, I have come to know you. Your strength, your intelligence, your dry sense of humor, the way you treat everyone with kindness even when they do not necessarily deserve it. I have fallen in love with you, and I do not know how to say that any plainer." Tabitha's breath caught. The words hung in the cold air between them, stark and honest and terrifying. "I know my ranch is not much," he continued, "and I know life out there is harder than town life. I cannot offer you luxury or society or even neighbors close by, but I can offer you my whole heart and my promise that I will work every day to make you happy. I want to marry you, Tabitha. I want you to be my wife, my partner, the person I build a life with. Will you have me?" She realized she was crying, cold tears tracking down her cheeks. "I cannot sing," she said, her voice breaking. "I cannot dance properly. I am not accomplished in the ways women are supposed to be accomplished." "I do not care about any of that," Dalton said fiercely. He took her hands in his. "I care about you, just you exactly as you are." "Yes," Tabitha whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, because I love you too, Dalton Crawford, and I think I started loving you the moment you asked me to dance in silence." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Tabitha felt something inside her heal, some wounded part of herself that had believed she was fundamentally lacking. Here was a man who saw all of her, the strengths and the failures, and loved her anyway. They were married in April, when the valley exploded with wildflowers and new grass. It was a simple ceremony in the church, with half the town in attendance. Martha cried, and Mr. Chen gave Tabitha a beautiful silk scarf as a wedding gift, and Sarah Bennett sang a hymn in her clear soprano while Tabitha stood at the altar and did not mind at all that she could not carry a tune. The wedding supper was held at the community hall, and when the dancing started, Dalton led his bride onto the floor. The fiddler played a waltz, sweet and romantic, and they danced the way they always danced, slowly, quietly, to their own internal rhythm that had nothing to do with the music filling the hall. People watched and smiled, thinking it was charming how the newlyweds only had eyes for each other. "Happy," Dalton murmured against her hair. "Happier than I thought possible," Tabitha replied. "When I arrived in Ogden a year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I had made a terrible mistake and would pay for it forever. And now I think it was the best mistake I ever made. Because it brought me here. It brought me to you." That night, Dalton carried her over the threshold of the ranch house he had worked so hard to prepare for her arrival. He had added curtains to the windows, a new stove for the kitchen, a beautiful handmade quilt for their bed. Every detail spoke of care, of a man preparing a home for the woman he loved. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, punctuated with laughter when they fumbled in their nervousness, with whispered words of love and reassurance. Tabitha fell asleep in her husband's arms, listening to the wind in the eaves and the distant call of a coyote, and thought she had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely home. Life on the ranch was hard work, just as Dalton had warned. Tabitha learned to milk cows, to tend chickens, to help with the horses that were Dalton's pride and joy. Her hands grew rough with work, her skin tanned from hours outdoors, and she loved every minute of it. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, and in the evenings they sat on their porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Summer brought branding time, and Dalton hired 3 temporary hands to help with the roundup. Tabitha cooked for the crew, huge meals that disappeared in minutes, and listened to their stories around the campfire. One of the hands, a young man named Billy, had brought his guitar, and he played every evening, singing songs of lost loves and distant places. "You should sing along, Mrs. Crawford," Billy said one night. "A pretty lady like you must have a pretty voice." "I cannot sing," Tabitha said comfortably without embarrassment. "I am completely tone deaf, but I enjoy listening, so please keep playing." Dalton caught her eye across the fire and winked, and she felt the warmth of his understanding flow between them. In September, Tabitha missed her monthly courses and realized with a mixture of terror and joy that she was pregnant. When she told Dalton, he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. He became impossibly protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, until Tabitha firmly told him she was pregnant, not made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while doing far harder work than feeding chickens," she informed him. "I will tell you when I need help." The baby came in late April, just over a year after their wedding, during a spring thunderstorm that shook the house. The midwife from town arrived barely in time, and Dalton paced outside the bedroom door until Tabitha shouted for him to either come in and be useful or go tend the horses. He came in, holding her hand through the worst of it, and was the first to hold their son when he finally emerged, red-faced and screaming his displeasure at the world. They named him Daniel, and he had his father's dark hair and his mother's gray eyes. Dalton was besotted from the first moment, carrying the baby everywhere, talking to him constantly as if he could understand. Tabitha watched her husband with their son and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. "I never knew I could love this much," she told Dalton one night as they watched their son sleep in his cradle. "It is almost frightening how much I love you both." "I know exactly what you mean," Dalton said, pulling her close. "You have given me a family, Tabitha. You have given me everything." The years unfolded with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious boy who followed his father everywhere. 2 years after Daniel came Grace, a daughter with Tabitha's dark hair and a disposition so sunny it seemed impossible she could be related to her serious older brother. And 3 years after Grace came Thomas, born during a November snowstorm, completing their family. The ranch prospered. Dalton's reputation for breeding quality horses spread, and buyers came from as far as Salt Lake City. They added more land, more cattle, built a bigger barn. Tabitha kept the books, managed the household, and discovered she had a talent for business that surprised everyone, including herself. She negotiated contracts with buyers, managed their finances, and even convinced Dalton to start breeding draft horses for the mining operations opening up in the surrounding mountains. "You are a better businessman than I am," Dalton admitted one evening, looking over the books. "Partner," Tabitha corrected. "We are partners, remember? Everything we have built, we built together." Ogden grew around them. The transcontinental railroad that had come through years before brought more people, more commerce, more connection to the wider world. The town transformed from a dusty frontier settlement into a thriving community with proper stores, a real school, even a small opera house where traveling performers occasionally stopped. One winter evening when Daniel was 8, Grace was 6, and Thomas was 3, the family bundled up and went into town for a Christmas concert at the Opera House. A singer had come from back east, a woman with a trained voice who performed classics and popular songs for the delighted audience. Tabitha sat between her husband and her oldest son, listening to the soaring melodies, and felt no envy, no regret for the talent she did not possess. She had something far better. A life she had built with her own hands, a man who loved her unconditionally, and children who filled every day with joy and chaos. On the ride home, with the children drowsy in the back of the wagon, Dalton said, "Do you ever miss it? The city, the culture, the things you left behind?" "Not for a single moment," Tabitha said honestly. "My life began the day I arrived in Ogden, even though I did not know it at the time. Everything before was just preparation." "I am glad you missed your stagecoach," Dalton said with a smile. "I did not miss it. I was on time. Harold Winters was just inconveniently dead." "Well, I am glad he was inconveniently dead then. Is that terrible of me?" "Probably," Tabitha agreed. "But I am glad too." Years continued to pass. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Daniel had his father's quiet strength and his mother's head for numbers. He took to ranch work naturally, already talking about expanding their breeding program. Grace was social and musical, blessed with the singing voice her mother had always wanted. She sang in church, in school programs, her clear soprano making Tabitha's eyes sting with proud tears. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into scrapes, bringing home injured animals, driving them all to distraction with his boundless energy. "He reminds me of you," Tabitha told Dalton. "He reminds me of you," Dalton countered. "That stubbornness, that refusal to accept limitations." "I was never that energetic. You were that determined. Same thing, different expression." When Daniel was 16, a pretty girl from town started finding excuses to ride out to the ranch. Her name was Emily Harrison, and she was the daughter of the banker. Tabitha watched her son tumble head over heels and remembered what it felt like, those early days of discovery and hope. "Should I talk to him?" Dalton asked, watching Daniel show Emily around with painfully obvious pride. "And say what? Be careful with your heart. Do not fall in love." "We of all people have no business giving that advice. I just do not want him to get hurt." "He will get hurt," Tabitha said gently. "That is part of living, part of loving. All we can do is be here when he needs us." But Daniel did not get hurt. Emily Harrison loved him back, and 3 years later they married in a ceremony far grander than the simple service Tabitha and Dalton had shared. The young couple built a house on Crawford land, and Daniel took over more and more of the ranch operations as Dalton's back began to protest the hard work of his younger years. Grace fell in love with the son of a merchant, a young man who wanted to open a music store in Salt Lake City. She married at 20 and moved away, though she visited often, filling the house with her laughter and songs. Thomas, the wild one, surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine. He left for California to study, writing long letters about his classes, about the marvels he was learning. "All our children are finding their own paths," Tabitha said one evening. She and Dalton sat on their porch, gray now in their hair, lines earned by hard work and laughter creasing their faces. "We did something right." "You did something right," Dalton corrected. "You made this place a home, made our family strong." "We did it together," Tabitha insisted, as she always did. Their first grandchild arrived when Tabitha was 49, a little girl that Daniel and Emily named Alice. Tabitha held her granddaughter and marveled at the miracle of it, this continuation of life, this proof that love could extend across generations. More grandchildren followed. Daniel and Emily had 4 children in total. Grace had 3. And even Thomas eventually returned from California with a wife and added 2 more to the growing Crawford clan. The ranch house that Dalton had built with his own hands decades ago was too small for the gatherings, so they added on, building a great room where everyone could assemble for holidays and celebrations. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the family threw them a party. 36 people crowded into the house and spilled out onto the porch. Children, grandchildren, neighbors, friends accumulated over a quarter-century of life in Ogden. There was music and dancing, and at one point someone called for Dalton and Tabitha to dance. "Should we?" Tabitha asked, looking up at her husband. He was 53 now, his dark hair silver at the temples, his face weathered by sun and wind. But his eyes, those creek water eyes, looked at her with the same warmth they had held the first time he asked her to dance. "I think we should," he said. They took the floor while the fiddler played a lively tune, and they danced exactly as they had always danced. Slowly, quietly, to their own rhythm that had nothing to do with the music swirling around them. Their grandchildren watched and giggled, not understanding. Their own children watched and smiled, knowing the story. And Tabitha and Dalton moved together in their own bubble of silence, just as they had been doing for 25 years. "I love you," Tabitha said softly. "I have loved you from the moment you told me we would dance in silence together." "I love you more each year," Dalton replied. You are my greatest blessing, Tabitha Crawford, my only blessing that matters. When the song ended, everyone applauded and someone called for Tabitha to make a speech. She stood in the middle of her great room, surrounded by family and friends, and felt the weight of gratitude pressing on her chest. "I am not good with words," she began, echoing the phrase Dalton had used when he proposed so many years ago. "But I want to say something about second chances. When I came to Ogden 26 years ago, I thought my life was over. I had lost everything and I felt like a failure, but this community took me in. Mr. Chen gave me a job when I desperately needed one. Martha gave me a place to stay. And Dalton," she looked at her husband, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dalton saw something in me that I did not see in myself. He asked me to dance when I could not dance. He loved me when I did not think I was worthy of love. He gave me this life, this family, this home." She paused, collecting herself. "I cannot sing. I still cannot dance properly, no matter how many years I practice. But I can love and I can build and I can be grateful every single day for the mistakes and miracles that brought me here. Thank you all for being part of our lives. Thank you for making Ogden home." There was not a dry eye in the room when she finished. Grace stood and sang for them then, a beautiful ballad about enduring love, and Tabitha listened to her daughter's perfect voice and felt no envy, only pride and joy. The years after that passed with increasing swiftness, the way years do when you are happy and content. Dalton's back grew worse, and eventually he had to give up the hardest ranch work, turning operations over to Daniel completely. He spent his days instead working with the horses he loved, gentle training and breeding decisions, teaching his grandchildren to ride the way he had once taught his own children. Tabitha kept the books until her eyes grew too weak to see the small numbers. Then she taught her granddaughter Alice to take over, passing on the skills Mr. Chen had taught her so long ago. She spent her time sewing quilts for new babies, telling stories to the younger grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Dalton, watching the sun set behind mountains that had witnessed their entire life together. "You have any regrets?" she asked him one evening. They were both 70 now, their hands gnarled with age, their steps slower than they once were. "Not a single one," Dalton said. "Everything I wanted I got. A good woman, fine children, a life well lived. What more could a man ask for?" "I regret that I never learned to carry a tune," Tabitha said with a small laugh. "Even after all these years, I still cannot sing." "You do not need to sing," Dalton said, taking her hand. "You made music with your life instead. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, this family. That is a song worth singing, even if it is silent." "A silent song," Tabitha repeated thoughtfully. "I like that." "We have always done things our own way," Dalton reminded her. Why stop now? On a clear August morning when Tabitha was 73, Dalton did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding hers, his face calm in the morning light. Tabitha sat beside him for a long time before calling for Daniel, memorizing every line of his beloved face, saying goodbye to the man who had taught her what love truly meant. They buried him on the hill overlooking the ranch he had built, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The whole town came, 3 generations of Crawfords and countless friends whose lives Dalton had touched with his quiet kindness. Tabitha stood beside the grave, dry-eyed, and knew that her heart was breaking but also that it had been worth it, every moment, every year, every silent dance. She lived 3 more years, staying in the ranch house with Daniel and Emily, watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard where her own children had once played. She told them stories about their great-grandfather, about the Wild West days when Ogden was young, about dancing in silence to music only 2 people could hear. On a Sunday afternoon in October, 76 years old, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, Tabitha Crawford sat in her rocking chair on the porch and closed her eyes. She thought about the stagecoach that had brought her west so long ago, about a dead man she had never met, about another man who had asked her to dance when she could not dance. She thought about children and grandchildren, about a life that had grown from the ashes of what she thought was disaster into something more beautiful than she could have imagined. When Daniel found her an hour later, she was gone, a peaceful smile on her face, her hands folded in her lap. In her pocket, they found a scrap of paper with 2 lines written in her shaky handwriting. "I cannot dance or sing, but I have lived a life of music. Thank you, my love, for teaching me the steps." They buried her beside Dalton on the hill, and Grace sang at her funeral, her voice breaking with grief but still beautiful, still clear. All 9 grandchildren were there, and 17 great-grandchildren, and the church was packed with people whose lives Tabitha had touched, people she had helped in the mercantile all those years ago, people she had welcomed into her home, people who remembered her kindness and her quiet strength. Years later, when the grandchildren were old and telling stories to their own grandchildren, they always came back to the same tale, the one about the woman who could not dance and the cowboy who asked her to dance anyway. The one about building a life from nothing, about love that endured through hardship and time. The one about silent music that only 2 people could hear, but that echoed through generations. The ranch still stood, passed down through the family, and on the wall of the great room hung a photograph. Dalton and Tabitha on their 25th anniversary, caught in the middle of their strange, slow dance, looking at each other as if no one else in the world existed. Below it, someone had mounted a small brass plaque with words from Tabitha's funeral. She could not dance or sing, but she made music with her life. And in Ogden, Utah, a town that had grown from a dusty frontier settlement into a thriving city, people still told the story of the mail-order bride who arrived 3 weeks too late and found something better than she had ever imagined. They told it to remind themselves that disaster could become blessing, that broken plans could lead to better destinations, that sometimes the most beautiful music was the kind only 2 hearts could hear. The story became legend, passed down through families, embellished and refined over time. But at its core remained the simple truth, that love did not require perfection, that grace came in many forms, that a man who offered to dance in silence with a woman who could not dance had offered something far more valuable than any perfectly executed waltz. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew through the valley and the stars came out over the mountains, people swore they could sometimes hear it, that silent music, still playing for anyone who listened with their heart instead of their ears.